Have Mr. Tony Gosling back with us to continue that discussion. Mr. Gosling, it was quite surprising to see that the U.S. even had to ask the Dominican Republic for support on this particular resolution, and still it did not gain enough support to pass it.
Well, the United States' credibility in the rest of the world is virtually zero at the moment, because they seem to be the bullies of the world, a regime change organisation, really. Very little respect for the United States. They've lost a lot of their credibility. But look, this deal between the UAE and Israel, I think, is really important, because it's showing in public view what many people have suspected for decades, that many of these Gulf states have been working very closely with the Israelis and effectively have been part of the kind of crusader exercise to balkanise the Middle East. Very, very clear. And by the way, the Bulgarian investigative journalist Iliana Katasheva a few years ago in the Battle of Aleppo managed to discover that the UAE had actually been smuggling arms, smuggling heavy weapons, and we're talking about artillery, etc., to ISIS and al-Nusra and al-Qaeda in Syria. So they were being used as basically the cat's paws for the West, for the United States. This military equipment, the end user agreements said that the equipment was going eventually to the United States. So it was obvious who was paying for all of this, but this was ending up in the warehouses of the so-called Syrian rebels, really they're mercenaries, in Syria. The UAE has been doing this for many years, and really this agreement is just saying in public what's been going on behind the scenes for decades. And the United Arab Emirates and the United Kingdom have some things in common here, because most ordinary people in these countries want nothing to do with the United States. It's just that their government has sold out their countries to this marvellous new US empire that is supposed to be taking over the world, if you can believe that. I don't think they're really going to succeed. They're trying very hard, and in fact I think they're on a hiding to nothing. They're even prepared to construct conflicts very much like the Vietnam War, the Korean War and things like that in the Middle East right this minute in order to try and get their way. Yes, I think your foreign minister in Iran is absolutely right, talking about a post-West era. That is exactly what we're starting to see now, is that the West is starting to lose any credibility. The European Union seen as just being a good cop to the Americans' bad cop. And basically, the rest of the world is backing off from these countries. African countries, Asian countries have had enough of all of this. So I think that, yes, you're right. This is showing that UAE is just another Israeli-type crusader state for the West in the Arab world. And the ordinary people of UAE, I think, are as fed up with that as most people are in Iran and in many other parts of the world. This is basically brewing up for a conflict eventually, and it should be called out as such. These are not democratic countries, of course. They're basically ruled by single families, and that's part of the problem. If there was an election tomorrow in UAE, those people would almost certainly be gone, vanished, and probably behind bars.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tony Gosling. We would have loved to continue that discussion, but we're running out of time. That was Mr. Tony Gosling, investigative journalist out of Bristol, and Mr. David Yaghoubian, professor of history at CSU San Bernardino. Thank you very much for your comments, gentlemen, and thanks to all of our viewers for following this edition of the News Review.